and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 112, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
And me, Ravi Abbott.
Now, right at the start of this week's show, I do have to apologise. I've been somewhere rather unpleasant before I came in here today.
He's just had a filling, so he might be going what later on as the numbness wears off.
I drove here straight from the dentist. So if I sound a bit slurry, I'm not drunk, I promise. No. Yeah. Have you ever had Novocaine before?
Yeah, and it's just really like, you feel like you've been punched in the mouth once it wears off.
Oh, well, I look forward to that in about half an hour then. So, Ravi's got the displeasure of watching drool dribble down my chin for the next hour or so. But hopefully that'll wear off soon. I don't sound too slurry on this week's show. That was a wise choice, wasn't it, going there before I came here? But we have got a really good show today. I'm not going to do the majority of the talking because today we're going to be talking about one of the most iconic computers of all time from Britain that is getting a reinvention for the 21st century. Today's show, we're going to talk about the ZX Spectrum Next.
You know, the Spectrum, it reeks of the 80s for me. It's like Clive Sinclair, you know, that kind of small enterprise projects and all of that stuff. It was very about Britain and their kind of innovation. And the Spectrum shouldn't have been popular, should it? I'll probably get killed for saying that.
Don't tell our guests that this week, right?
Yeah. But, you know, it had all things against it. It was a small machine. It had a low memory. But people used it and they created absolutely amazing things on it, you know, and it continued for so long. And this is a continuation of that now.
Well, the original Spectrum was affordable. That's why people bought it, I think.
Yeah.
Because, you know, that was one of the first
during
machines.
A recession, wasn't it?
Yeah, the early 80s, you know, miners' strike era and all that, wasn't it? So that was kind of one of the first machines that people could afford to own at home. And it spawned an absolute revolution. I mean, we often get messages of people saying they listen to our show to get this kind of unique British perspective, because I know there was kind of clones of the Spectrum around the world.
Yeah, there was those strange Russian ones, wasn't there, and the Timex ones in America as well.
But it didn't have the same kind of cultural influence that it did over here in the UK. I mean, in the 80s, it was a phenomenon over here. And I even remember into the 90s, I remember stuff like, you know, when Alan Sugar obviously bought out Sinclair.
Yeah, first Spectrum I saw was in like late 90s at my mate's house. He was still rocking it and playing Escape to Colditch, you know.
I remember, there was some like tape decks built in and like, you know, micro drives and all that kind of stuff. So it was, you know, such a big machine here. And this machine we're talking about today, the ZX Spectrum Next, is a continuation of the original hardware with some really cool new specs. And we've actually got a team of guys together who we had on stage at Play Expo in Blackpool last month. In typical Retro Hour style, we didn't record that panel, and I don't think anyone else did. But that's all right, because we managed to get them all together again to come on the show. And we've actually got a few more questions. It's going to be a bit longer than like the 40-minute one.
Yeah, because this one's a bit more updated, because we're actually getting really close to release now.
Yeah, I mean, Kickstarter backers have already got it, but it is kind of coming out for sale on the website this month. Now, we've got Jim Bagley, who I think he's kind of established himself as like Mr. Spectrum now, hasn't he?
Yeah, you couldn't do a new development without Jim Bagley. He's the guy that did, you know, what was it, Dragon's Lair on the ZX Spectrum.
He's put it on this, yeah.
Yeah, amazing feats of programming.
And obviously he's got a big history with the Spectrum. I mean, after Clive Sinclair, Jim Bagley's your next guy, isn't he, if you're talking about the Spectrum? And we've got Mike Dailly of their DMA design fame.
Legendary company.
Absolutely, and he's got a long history with the Specky. And he's actually managed to get Lemmings working on the ZX Spectrum Next, pretty much up to Amiga quality.
Oh, wow.
So we'll talk to him about that. And he's doing like a series of programming tutorials about it as well. And if we're talking about legendary Spectrum games, what's the biggest one?
Oh, Dizzy. Of course, for me, publicly, you know, I'd go see the exhibition of Dizzy at the National Video Game Arcade. Every single person that I've seen at events have run it with Dizzy cassettes and everything. And even the Oliver Twins were on Go 8-bit the other day. Did you see that, Dan?
No, I didn't actually. I haven't seen anything.
They were using their heads as controllers, which is quite funny.
Well, we're definitely asking them about
that today.
Playing
Quick Snacks Dizzy, yeah.
Well, they're actually making a new Dizzy called Wonderful Dizzy. We saw a little preview of that at Play Expo. And that looks incredible. And I think it's going to be an exclusive on the Next, if I'm not mistaken. They're releasing it essentially at, like, you know, they're giving all the money to charity or for free if you want to download it. So we're going to talk a bit about this new Spectrum, how it kind of relates to the past, what it's going to bring into the 21st century, why these guys that were in it originally are that excited and fueled up about it, and you know, exactly what it's going to bring to the Spectrum community, really. So if you've got any interest in the Spectrum, past, present or future, this is one not to miss. We're going to have our big ZX Spectrum Next panel on the Retro Hour podcast in around 15 minutes from now. Now, before we get into that, you've been chatting to quite a few of our listeners this week.
Yeah, I have. I've started a service. It's called Discord, which is a...
You didn't start Discord.
No. I started a server on Discord, which is a kind of gaming chat service.
Yeah.
And Amigos podcast actually has one for patrons. So I was like, oh, that's a good idea. But let's make it public for everybody. So we've got little sections on there. You know, you can do voice chat if you want to come on and play some games. We've also got like different introductions, related servers as well. But the coolest thing we're going to be doing is an IRC bridge. So at some point, I'm hoping next week, we're going to be able to connect with your old Amiga 4000 or any of your old machines and kind of be in this chat channel with us all.
But for now, I mean, we've used Discord a little bit. I think the first time we used it was that the interview we did a couple of weeks ago with the Bitmap Euro guys.
Yeah.
And it is kind of, I mean, you mentioned the voice chat and all that there as well, but you can just use it as like an IRC kind of web service.
Yeah, and it's also kind of used like a forum as well, because you'd have different categories. Like we've got an introductions one, and people are putting in all their lovely stories about how they started listening to the podcast and stuff. You can get it on your phone, on the web, everywhere.
We've got a suggestions area. People have been talking about people they'd like to hear on the show.
Yeah.
We've got general discussion in there as well. I've seen modern gaming section. There's all sorts. Little DJ section.
Yeah. You can pick tunes and kind of play retro music. We had a good Stock Aitken and Waterman mix on the other day.
Bit of Sonia.
Yeah.
But it sounded a bit like, Yahoo Chat used to be in some ways then, I guess.
Yeah. It's really mad, but it's kind of multifunctional, so you can do lots of these different things and decide how you want to use it. And it'd be great to have more people join us. Yeah.
Well, considering we haven't really promoted it much, we've got about 50 in there already.
Yeah.
So if you want to join us, it's dead easy. I mean, there are, like Ravi said, there are desktop apps you can download. You can get it on your phone, or just use a web interface. You can go on that way too.
So if you go to theretrohour.com, we will have an invite there, and you just accept our invitation, which is permanently there, and you'll be on the server.
More ways to distract us from doing our work all day. That's what we need. And speaking of the retrohour.com, that is also the place where you can go to support this show. Now, if you listen week in, week out, and you like what we do, and you want us to continue doing it, obviously we appreciate any help that we can get with that. Because, coming in doing a weekly podcast, not many of them are around.
Nope.
And we need to do server hosting costs, SoundCloud subscriptions. It all adds up, and getting to events and that kind of thing too. So if you'd like to make a little donation into the running of the show, it is completely optional, but we appreciate every penny, every pound, every euro, every dollar, every cent, and you will find your place in the Hall of Fame for making a donation. Now, this week, we want to say a huge thank you to Stephen Quinn,
Rafe Hoffmans,
David Holt,
Patrick McGinty,
and Stuart Cousins, who all made donations into the running of the show. Thank you so much. Really means a lot to us. And you can do the same and get a mention on a future episode of the podcast by heading to our website, theretrohour.com. Now, one of our favourite guests, who was actually very early on, I think we had him in like one of our first 5 episodes maybe, and recently we met him again at Play Expo, was Mr. Biffo.
Oh, yes, Mr. Biffo, the guy from Digitizer and the original kind of teletext, which, he was a bit of a rebel reporter. Everyone else was in established magazines, and he was just on teletext going mental.
Well, he used to do a daily magazine on teletext in the late 80s, right through the early 2000s, actually, wasn't it? And it had a really kind of edgy sense of humour. Got away with a lot.
It was very strange, and he's got a new series which has been going on at the moment, and he told us about it at Play, and I kind of said I haven't seen it, which is just awful. I've gone and sat down and watched it, and it's one of the funniest, weirdest things I've seen. It's like he's kind of made up this found footage, but he's got people like Violet Berlin in it, he's got Ian Lee, he's got like Danny Wallace in it. All of these great. He's got Namrood in it.
Oh wow!
Yeah, and they're all kind of talking to this new character who is Gujon John, who is kind of he's the equivalent of Patrick Moore.
Well, you've sent me a little clip here. So.
Well, this is for his new Kickstarter that's launching today, which is Digitizer the Show. So he's had his found footage, which has gone very well.
Yeah. He's
now kickstarting for a full web series, which is going to involve the original YouTubers against some of the old school people like Violet Berlin, Imran Youssef. There's Danny Wallace, the guy who did Liar.
Yes Man, wasn't it?
Yes Man, not Liar.
Hollywood movie, yeah.
Yeah. And it's just going to be fantastic.
So,
and it's a total send-up of all of the gaming shows. It's a total, taking a mick out of everything, of course, in a Digitizer style.
Yeah, it wouldn't be him with it if it didn't, would it?
No.
So this clip here, this is on Games You Loved, one of our favourite websites, good friends of ours. And they've got a little page that we'll link in our show notes at theretrohour.com. You can watch kind of all the trailers together and get a link to the Kickstarter, which starts on March the 9th, so day the show comes out. So here's a little clip of Gujon John.
So, are you tired of YouTubers screaming at you, rubbing their scalps with anime figurines? Do you yearn for the days of proper gaming TV shows that you actually cared about? Do you wish there was a retro gaming web series that you could refer to as the greatest thing you ever watched? A show from the fervored mind of a man calling himself Mr. Biffo, knowing that you played a part in getting it made. Well then, prepare yourself, my child, for the most important event in retro gaming ever. Gird thyself for Digitizer, the show.
Yeah, so as you can see from that editing as well, it's really well done, and it's done in that kind of VHS, 90s style.
Well, he's even got like Games Master playing in the background of that clip as well, which it kind of gives it that authentic retro kind of feel straight away, obviously.
Totally.
But yeah, that's cool that he's doing this, because I love the fact that Paul is now taking what was originally a very basic text format into all these new kind of avenues, like whether it be videos or movies and that kind of thing.
And the thing is, the writing is really strong on it as well. You kind of have some of these send-ups and you're like, yeah, that's not so good. But this, I was watching the found footage series and I was on the floor laughing, and so was my girlfriend, actually. She's like, this is weird stuff. It reminds me of like, Vic and Bob.
Yeah.
Or kind of Brass Eye.
I mean, even think of the characters he had on Digitizer, people like the man with the long chin and Fat Sal and Insincere Dave. He's always been a good character writer.
Yeah, definitely.
So he kind of brings that into this kind of video format now, I suppose. So the Kickstarter launches today, and is this going to be released then on like physical and online?
I'm not sure. It says it's a web series, so I assume it's going to come out on YouTube, or it may be on another platform. It might be on Netflix or something. Who knows?
Well, we'll know more obviously when the show comes out. So we'll put all the information in this week's show notes. If you're a fan of Digitizer, I'd say you need to support this.
Yeah, and just watch the found footage, because you will be sent to a very surreal place.
Now, speaking of those heady days back in the early 90s, were you a fan of the game Stunt Car Racer?
Oh, I love Stunt Car Racer with the wheels where it go when it would
you got the fire coming out.
When you basically lose control on one of the ramps, that's the worst bit, and you've got to try and land it at like 45 degrees or something.
Yeah, you do. You fly up in the air, don't you, and land down again. Because that was a game that was famous on the Commodore 64. I had it on the Amiga 500. Mm-hmm. That's what I played it on. And it was kind of an early attempt at 3D as well, in many ways. It was quite advanced for the time.
Oh, yeah. It was really revolutionary, because, when you had two players as well on it, or a system link, you could actually see the other car and you could keep up in time, even though the frame rate was like 2 frames per second or so.
I forgot you could do like system link. You could, couldn't you? Like modem cable. That was really cool. And it kind of reminded me, whenever I played it, even though it was meant to be like a racer game, it was a bit more like a roller coaster, really, where the tracks went up and down. And it was,
with the raised sections and the berms and stuff.
Yeah, when you saw it from the side, it did look like a roller coaster. But the physics in that game to run like the Commodore 64 and like a 7 megahertz Amiga must have been quite a feat of programming for the time.
Oh, definitely. And, they'd even reduce the small screen size in the middle.
But now, someone's actually ported this to the Atari 8-bit computers. So you can play this on the Atari XE and the XL.
Oh, wow.
Which, it's kind of been a project that's been ongoing for quite a while now on the Atari Age forum, which is like, if you're an Atari fan, that is a forum that you've got to go to find out all the latest Atari news. But it is really cool that they've actually sat down, a team of them they're meant to get this out before Christmas, but it's took a little bit longer. But I think this looks really good already now. It's got all the features of the Commodore 64 on there, including improved frame rates.
Wow.
So it runs quicker. It's got music on there, sound effects. There's even like QR code generation for a high score cafe that you can do on their website as well. So got a few mod cons on there.
That's insane, though, that they're kind of, doing improvements upon the C64 version. And this is a right feat of engineering, isn't it?
And what's more, it's free.
Oh.
So if you're a fan of the the Atari 8-bit range and you want to give that a download, we'll put that link to the Atari Age forum.
Very impressed with that.
Yeah, it looks really good. It makes me want to go out and get an Atari XE now. So we'll put that in this week's show notes at theretrohour.com. Now, one of our favourite games of last year was Ron Gilbert's new adventure game, Thimbleweed Park.
Absolutely love that, yeah. The only problem was, finding those specks of dust.
Did you put it on hard mode, obviously?
Yeah.
I played it through. Well, I played it through so many times. I must admit, I kind of copped out in the end and put it on easy mode on the Nintendo Switch just to see the story.
No, I hardcored it. Yeah, but I did it with my girlfriend, so we had 2 people hardcoring it, which wasn't so bad because we could spot things the other person couldn't.
You didn't use a walkthrough?
No.
See, when I play the old adventure games, occasionally I do get stuck and like Google a walkthrough. Is that lame?
It is lame, yeah. I kind of had to sit there for 2 days and just be like, right, I'm going to complete this no matter what.
I haven't always got the time these days, though. You just want to get past the next bit of the game. But the story was great. I mean, for anyone that didn't play it, it was kind of a modern version of those old LucasArts adventure games.
But also, if you played it in different ways, the storyline would have changed as well.
Yeah.
So, everybody's had a different experience with Thimbleweed Park.
Yeah, it was kind of like a pick-your-own adventure game, wasn't it? Some great characters. I mean, if you remember Monkey Island, like LeChuck, obviously, he was a great character. Ron's got a great mind for writing them. But I think one of my favourite characters in Thimbleweed Park had to be Ransom the Clown.
Yeah, he really reminded me of Krusty.
Yeah.
He's kind of got
More bitter, though.
that horrible streak. Yeah.
Well, for people that haven't played the game, tell us a bit about Ransom.
Oh, Ransom, he was just a horrible, nasty guy, wasn't he? And he was on this abandoned theme park, from what I remember, and he'd swear a hell of a lot. Yeah. That was one of the parts of it. He changed the tone of the game to pretty hardcore when it seemed like quite a nice one. When you were walking around before doing nice things, you get to Ransom. No, it's nasty.
He's insulting all the audience and everything, isn't he? And little spoiler here. Block your ears if you haven't played the game. He does get a curse on him as well, doesn't he? So well deserved as well. But like you said, I mean, he does swear all throughout the game. But being, a family-friendly game and coming out on platforms like the Nintendo Switch, all of his swearing was beeped out, as you'd expect from like a Ron Gilbert game. Mm-hmm. But if you really want to hear Ransom in all of his glory, there is now a DLC pack that you can download.
Just for £1.69, you can remove all the beats.
You can essentially hear all the F and S words in all their glory. I've watched the trailer. I can't play it on this show because we are family friendly. But it's called Thimbleweed Park's Ransom Unbeeped DLC. So I will put that with a little warning in this week's show notes if you want to hear it.
I'm loving one of the reviews. This is the best beeping DLC I've ever purchased.
I think it's only available for the PC version, from what I can see.
Yeah, that was the version I played.
Yes, I mean, I can't imagine they're going to improve this on the Nintendo Switch store. So it's not going to be on there. But it's on GOG.com and Steam. And some people are saying it kind of ruins the subtlety of the game a little bit. Other people are saying, it makes it even funnier. I mean, for me, I think having the beeps does make it quite amusing. But then it kind of gives you the choice, I guess. If you want to play it when the kids are out and hear, Ransom getting really carried away, then for the sake of £1.69.
Oh, yeah, it's such a good game, and I hope they have more DLC that's a bit more complex than just beeps.
Yeah, when I did see there was DLC for it, I must admit I was a bit more excited than what it actually turned out to be. But like I said, the fact is they've set the system up that they can actually do plugins for the game and extra modes and that kind of thing. So, and for that price, I mean, even just to support Ron a bit more and say how much we love the game, worth making a little donation, I think. Now, a system that we don't talk about all that much on this show, but it is very dear to my heart, would be the Commodore Plus 4. Now, that was my first ever computer that I got when I was a kid. Bit of an obscure machine. It was compatible with the Commodore 16. They were like Commodore's biggest failures, really, in the 80s.
Yeah, I've often seen you go up to people and they go, "What was your first machine, Dan?" And you go, "The Plus 4." And they go, "Oh, we're very sorry for you, Dan."
Always get the sympathy vote with that. But now there is, if you click on this little link here, there's a new game made for the Commodore Plus 4 called Pets Rescue.
Oh, cool.
Now, it looks really good. It kind of reminds me of like Mayhem in Monsterland on the Commodore 64.
Yeah, but it's very much got a Mario kind of look with those pipes in the ground and stuff like that.
Graphically, it looks amazing, though, especially if you watch it. There's a little video here as well. Now, I haven't played any of the music or anything on it, so we're going to have a little listen. Pretty funky.
Nice.
Now, bearing in mind, the Plus 4 didn't have like hardware sprites.
Yeah.
It didn't have a dedicated sound chip. So looking at this, I mean, it is essentially, like you said, it's a Mario kind of rip-off. Mm-hmm. But the graphics have got that kind of bubbly, like Super Nintendo look almost. And I think this is just an amazing feat for the Commodore 16 and Plus 4. A machine that is generally sneered at a little bit from a lot of retro fans. And like you said, everyone you talk to about it always thinks, poor you for owning one.
Well, it's by Cytronic, which are a really good company that kind of do modern games on old systems, so they're actually doing quite a few things for the Spectrum Next as well.
Yeah, well, looking at the quality of games, I mean, you can tell these guys are pros.
Oh, they've been doing it for years, I remember they were releasing C64 stuff back in the days as well. Well,
I think the thing about it is, with these machines now, people have had like 30 years to figure out all the kind of nuances of the hardware and learn tricks and all that, so that's why we're seeing stuff like this now that probably wouldn't have been possible when they were new. But they're actually releasing this as a commercial game as well, which I think is amazing. You know, the fact that we're getting a new Commodore 16 and Plus 4 commercial game in 2018.
Yeah,
nice.
I think they've been commercial for quite a few years, you know, and the advantage of that is getting the packaging and, you know, the manuals and the whole game experience, really.
Well, I've been thinking about for a while, you know, I need to get my Plus 4 out the cupboard and get it set up again. So I think I'm
You still got it? Your original
Oh, yeah, my original
one?
machine's still in mint
nice.
condition as well.
Oh,
so,
good lad.
And Marvin actually got me a Commodore 16 last year because I did have one of those years ago and I threw it in the bin, something I always regretted.
You need to get that out and you need to do a video on, like, your old games on it and stuff. And,
Yeah, well, I've done a couple. I did a top 10 list last year, top 10 Commodore 16 and Plus 4 games I did on YouTube. But the thing is, when you do those lists, everyone disagrees. It's like, why is this game not in there?
It's like,
it's
this
my
is
list.
my personal list.
You're wrong. But yeah, so I'll put that in this week's show notes if you want to see a little bit more about the 16 and Plus 4. It's not quite as bad as everyone makes out.
Okay.
Then again, I might be slightly biased because it wasn't, you know, my first machine. But this game looks cool, so if you want to find out more about that, maybe give it a buy. I'll put that in this week's show notes as well. Now, before we get into this week's Spectrum panel, this is quite cool. Something you spotted, a little bit of Apple news.
Yeah, so Apple are actually filing a kind of patent and trademark for their old logo.
The rainbow logo.
The rainbow logo, yeah, which was the really cool one, actually. I always liked the rainbow logo.
Now, that was a classic one, wasn't it? It had like the stripes on green, yellow, orange, red, violet and blue.
Yeah, that was the one, proper from the 80s. And, you know, this is... They want it embossed on the front of Apple Park Visitor Centre. They'll also be selling headgear, hats, and it looks like they're just trying to make a buck off the old kind of logo, but it's cool to see that they're looking at their roots a bit.
Yeah, because Apple don't often do that. Apple are very much a forward-thinking company, and they very rarely reference the past, really, so it's quite good to see them kind of respecting their legacy a bit. And with that logo, I mean, it is iconic. That was the logo that was embossed on the front of the Apple II, for example.
Yeah.
And whenever you see, you know, pictures of those old Apple machines, that logo really stands out, I think. And then when Steve Jobs came back to Apple in 97, he got rid of it and kind of put that, you know, monochrome one that we have today.
Yeah.
But looking at that logo, you can see why they changed it. I mean, that kind of colour stripe thing was a thing of the 80s that really, you know, showed off that we have colour in our machines, which is quite ironic considering the Mac was black and white, actually, thinking about it. But do you remember the original Apple logo? Have you ever seen that one?
No.
It's got Sir Isaac Newton on there. And
Okay.
he's sitting under an apple tree.
with it falling on his head. Yeah, I remember seeing that.
Yeah, and it's got like the wraparound apple. I mean, it was far too complex to use as like a day-to-day logo. So that was why they commissioned this, you know, the one with the bite out the apple.
It looks like something a fantasy guild would have, something like that.
Yeah, it'd be a lot of effort to print that on the front of every computer, wouldn't it? But it is cool that they're going to be doing that. And because the thing is about patents, they do expire after a while, don't they, if they don't use them?
Yeah.
So I think, I mean, I'm sure Apple have got the lawyers to challenge anyone that kind of use it without their permission. But I think it is really cool that they've actually applied for that again, hopefully. Even just merchandise and stuff, because Apple have always kind of appealed to the hipster kind of community anyway.
Totally, and I think, you know, they can make more overpriced items and sell them with this logo, you know.
I'd buy an 80 quid Apple II t-shirt with that on. Who am I kidding?
Oh, God.
All right, guys. Well, thank you for checking out episode number 112 of the Retro Hour podcast. We'll be out again next week from all of your favourite podcast clients. Please do keep those reviews coming in on iTunes as well, and our Facebook page.
Oh, yeah, we can review on that now.
Yeah, I enabled that about 2 weeks ago. Got about 3 on there at the moment. So any of those we get, obviously that all helps into getting the show in front of more people and gets us up the rankings and all that. And get yourself on Discord. What kind of stuff have you been talking about in Discord this week then?
There was a massive conversation on beer. What kind of beer we drink. We had a huge conversation on synth music as well.
Yeah.
Where everyone was talking about all their favourite synth artists and bands. Yeah, loads of stuff. We just talk about everything because it's general chat. But...
That's something on there about like, retro sweets and snacks that you have.
Oh, yeah,
in your
loads of
machine.
stuff.
So, I mean, if that's your kind of vibe, you know, if you like this show and you want to come and chat to us and other people that listen to the podcast, then we've got a link to our Discord chat room on the front page of theretrohour.com. Right then, are you ready to talk about the ZX Spectrum next?
Always.
With some of the biggest Spectrum experts in the world. Jim Bagley, Mike Dailly and the Oliver Twins are our special guests this week. And we'll catch you next Friday.
Ciao.
You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and it is our pleasure to welcome this week's very special guests. Now, today we're going to be talking about one of the most exciting projects in the world of retro right now, and new hardware as well, because this is a continuation of one of the most legendary 8-bit machines, the Sinclair Spectrum Next. Now, I think we'll get you guys to introduce yourselves. It would be good if you could just give us an introduction. Maybe tell us a bit about your history with the Spectrum as well and what you've done on that platform. So we'll start with you, Jim.
Yeah, my name's Jim Bagley. I've been in the games industry for about 32 years now. The first game I did on the Spectrum was Throne of Fire, which was the Mike Singleton game, which was like no pressure to do that one. Then I went on to do there was Street Sports Basketball, World Class Leaderboard, Cabal, Midnight Resistance. That's the two that I'm most known for on the Spectrum. Hudson Hawk, and I think that was it for the Specky.
You did quite a lot, Jim, to be fair.
Yeah, quite a few.
And we have Mike Dailly on the line as well. So tell us a bit about your history with the Spectrum, Mike.
Hi, I'm Mike Dailly. I haven't actually written any commercial stuff on the Spectrum, but I did grow up with them. I started out in the ZX81 and then I got a Spectrum. There was actually my mother's office one that they bought so I could write them a database that was written in Spectrum Basic, which was quite good fun. So I had a Spectrum for about a year or so, learned assembler and stuff and got into all the kind of games and things with it. I went on from then to the Commodore Plus 4, then the 64, and diverged a little bit from the normal Spectrum stuff. But it's always been a big draw for me. I love the old games.
And we have Philip and Andrew Oliver on the line as well.
Hello. Quick introduction.
Yes, give us a quick intro and tell us a bit about your history with the Specky.
Fine. Well, what I'll do is I'll do half and Andrew can do the other half. So it's Philip Oliver. We got into computers early, started on a Sinclair ZX81, then moved on to the Dragon 32, then the BBC Micro, then the Amstrad. And so by the time we got to the Spectrum, we actually were very late. And the way we got to Spectrum was that we had a number one bestseller, Super Robin Hood with Codemasters on the Amstrad. And David Darling, we were complaining that it was taking a long time for them to convert to the Spectrum. David Darling sent us a Spectrum in the post, and this must have been October 86. So really, really late to the Spectrum market. And quite frankly, we thought we'd missed it. We knew how huge the Spectrum market was. And in the previous years, we were in awe of some of the games on the Spectrum and just thought, well, we can't compete with that. But the free Spectrum turned up with David Darling saying, could you please convert your own game next time if you're going to complain at the people that we get to convert it, being slow. So it took us about a week to do the first one, and that was Ghost Hunters, which was pretty successful. Had a few problems with it. Somebody, whilst we were working on that, had already been engaged to do Grand Prix Simulator, so we let them crack on with that. But then after that, we decided to convert every single one of our own games. The next ones up were Pro Ski Simulator and Dizzy, the first of the Dizzies. And at this point, I'll let Andrew take over and carry on the list.
Yeah, so we made quite a lot of Dizzy games. I can't remember exactly how many. 2 flavours of Dizzy games. There was the adventure game, 6 or 7 games, like Treasure Island and Fantasy World and Mystery World and Dizzy, Prince of the Yoke. Anyway, and then there were some arcade games, fast food and quick snacks, Dizzy Down the Rapids, Bubble Dizzy, probably a couple of others in there. Panic Dizzy, there you go. I knew I'd forgotten one. But you know what? We'd go crazy. We'd go if we just were working on Dizzy games. But they were successful, and so we liked doing them. But we alternated them with other games. So we were writing various other games, generally for Codemasters, like the sort of BMX simulators and Race Against Time we did for charity, for the Bob Geldof charity. But in amongst all of that, we fitted in a couple of others for Activision. We were never actually employees of Codemasters. So we did Ghostbusters 2 and Incredible Shrinking Sphere. I'll probably leave it there because I think we've probably taken our slot on our intros.
No worries. Well, you guys have all got, incredible histories with the Spectrum, but the reason we're talking today is because there is a new version of the Spectrum, the ZX Spectrum Next. Now, Jim, you've been involved since very early in this project. I mean, you're probably well placed to tell us what the concept is behind the Spectrum Next.
Yeah, basically it's a FPGA clone of the Spectrum, but a next version of it with like a redesigned keyboard by the legendary Rick Dickinson, who did the original. So it looks amazing, as you probably know already. And I met Enrique, the main guy who'd funded it, like basically until we got to the Kickstarter when we needed the big cash for the mould. I met Enrique about a year ago. Play Blackpool. Basically, I was doing a talk about the games I'd done, and he was doing a talk after me. Obviously, he introduced the Spectrum Next, which was great. So, at the end of his talk, he said, "Is there any questions?" So I put my hand up and said, "Where can I get a dev kit?" The rest is history. I started adding. I was the only person who actually, out of the dev teams that had been given a board, I was the only person who thought, well, this is a next version of the Spectrum, and it's touted as the Spectrum Next. So I thought, well, what would be the next iteration? I thought, well, a lot of the games had, a lot of the machines that were coming out after, like the Amiga and Master Systems, Mega Drives, SNESs, NESs and stuff, they all had sprites. So I thought, well, if we add sprites to it, it'd make it easier for beginners to get things moving around on the screen and being able to program and make the game themselves. Basically, because a lot of the times when people come up to me at the shows and they say, I want to make a game for the Spectrum, how do you get something moving around on the screen? It's like, well, it's not that easy for a beginner. No, you've got to know a bit of machine code, because BASIC is really fast enough. Move things around in pixels, it gets really intricate. So I thought, well, if we add hardware sprites and hardware scrolling, then it would be easier for more people to get into it.
Well, when the Kickstarter did go live, it absolutely smashed its goals. I mean, were you expecting such a big response?
No, we were quite shocked, really, because of the timing of it. It was around the time of people were burnt by another Kickstarter. So we thought to get the 250k that was set as the target, we had like a little chat about whether we'd actually get it or not, and we all said that there's no way we're going to get it. If the only chance that we'll get it is if it's the last stretch, where it's the last couple of days, where it has another push. And within 33 hours, it had smashed through the 250k, and it just didn't stop. It was great. It was the whole thing was like mental, because my phone was non-stop vibrating and buzzing, and the notifications were interrupting notifications. It was just constantly buzzing with all the updates. It was great.
Well, Mike, how did you get involved with the Next?
I just saw it on the Kickstarter. Somebody had pointed me to the page, and then when I was reading through it and saw all the new toys, they had hardware sprites and they had videos of games running twice the speed. It was just really interesting. Anything that's kind of that era, I've got a big draw towards. And like I said, I did used to have a Spectrum, I never got to really use it properly. So with an old machine with new toys, that's always going to pull me in. So it was really just signing up with the Kickstarter, and then just sit and drool over all the stuff that was coming out with it.
Well, the Olivers, what appeals to you about the machine?
Well, what happened, I mean, it was kind of coincidental, really. Last Easter, day before Easter, I had a Facebook message from some Russians basically saying, it was Dmitry, and he was saying, tomorrow morning I'm launching a new Dizzy game, new Crystal Kingdom Dizzy version, and I just thought, yeah, fine. So I said, okay, good luck, right, great. There's quite a lot of people who write Dizzy fan games, but Easter morning I noticed quite a lot of buzz about it, and actually it was incredibly good. So on the sort of when we were back at work, and I work with Andrew still, even after all these years, we were just chatting about it and how amazing it was, what power they'd got out of the Spectrum, and what a good job they'd done of it. And we were sort of saying that, God, we could almost do a design a game for them, and they could program it, and that would be quite cool. But then a few days later, Andrew was with Henrik, and I'll let you carry on, Andrew.
This Kickstarter had just launched, was looking incredibly good and lots of activity, and people talking about sort of, obviously it emulates all the old games, so people will be able to play all your old games, but they're adding these features so people will be writing new games, and the joke being, oh, you could write a new Dizzy game. We're thinking, you know what, we actually tried a few years ago to sort of bring back Dizzy, doing our own Kickstarter, but to make a modern sort of console game would cost millions, and we don't believe there's quite the audience for Dizzy. We'd like to think there's a fond memory for Dizzy, but not quite. And we were going to tackle it in a sort of stylized 2.5D, but it was still going to cost a fair bit, and we didn't manage to get our Kickstarter. But we were always saying, well, Dizzy's about the story, and people remember it in these retro ways. And actually, we could make a Dizzy game like the old Dizzy games, but with a full new story. But how would you bring that out? Because we were talking then about like, would you bring it out on a PS Vita or an iPhone and stuff like that? But then this opportunity along with the Spectrum, and we were saying, well, actually, maybe that's the best place for it. If we wanted to do another Dizzy game, and we kind of would like to, we'll scope it and keep it to the size of running on a Spectrum. And with these new guys that Philip had got in contact with, what they had done is, from looking at the game, they'd recreated a better version of it. So they were entirely capable of doing the graphics and the coding and the editor, the map editor and things, which is actually what we were sort of slightly worried about, like getting all that stuff back together. We said we can easily design a game, but it's like recoding it, ooh, that's a bit hard. So that's when we just start talking and sort of joining all the dots.
Well, Mike, I was wondering, how does it improve on the original specs, and what are those kind of specs that make you completely drool and just think, oh my God, this is amazing?
Well, I mean, I used to like the original machine because it was just a CPU and a screen. So there was always just trying to make it go as fast as possible. That was the old ways. You still had this with the new machine. The double speed was really nice. But then once you start getting hardware sprites, it starts to get more interesting because you can start to do lots of tricks. Coming from the 64, it was all about hardware and sprites and character maps and stuff. You kind of learn a lot of tricks to do different things. And it takes away the bulk of the problem that you had on the Spectrum, which was just trying to draw moving objects, which means that you can spend more time on scrolling, more time on a little bit of processing and effects and things. So even with the sprites, because this was before all the other toys got added, it was suddenly that much more interesting to just, you could just push it that much more further. It got rid of all the kind of colour clash that you would get with games as characters walked about. I've always liked the really bright colours that you've had and the high res. I've never thought the blocky, two-colour thing was particularly bad. It was just as sprites moved across. Coming from the 64, it was kind of, be a bit nicer if. And then all of a sudden, that you've got that. So, right at the start, just the speed and just the hardware sprites was great. And then you obviously had this Raspberry Pi edition as well for a turbo. Now, if back in the day you could buy an accelerator that would speed up your machine by hundreds of times for a $5, everybody would have had one. So I've always thought that even though people are buying it without, if somebody starts making use of it, it's a $5. It's not going to cost. They'll just buy one because it's such an easy kind of thing to add. So it was just so many toys coming with it, and still programming in, an older language, Z80 with Z80. It's such good fun.
I mean, is there a bit of a divide with like the purists? Because I know some people love like the colour clashing on the Spectrum. They think it'd be like, scandalous to take it out.
I mean, I obviously played the games early on, and I still quite like them. But having touched so many machines, I'm not really, interested in preserving the Spectrum like as it was. If you want a Spectrum, there's millions out there. Go and buy one. There's no worries that you can't get it anymore. There's lots of kind of clones of them now as well that can hook up to HDMI. So I was really interested in a Spectrum and a little bit, which is what this started out as. I don't see the real problem of enhancing things. Even all the newer ones that people have been using, like the ZX Uno and stuff, they've added to it, and some people have done demos and stuff. And even back in the 90s, you got add-ons to do all the DMA things and do more effects and sound. So all these machines have always had little add-ons to it. So I've never seen the real problem of just giving it some more, particularly now with the kind of newer power that we've got in machines.
Well, Jim, how compatible is it with old Spectrum hardware? Like, can you use tape cassettes, for example?
Yeah, it's still got the jack. It's a stereo jack, and then you have a splitter and to plug it into the mic and the headphones on this cassette player. So yeah, it should be compatible with everything.
Finding a cassette player that still works might be an issue.
Yeah. Someone posted on the Facebook group that they are still for sale as well. So.
Oh,
really?
What about like the add-ons? Like I remember they had the Spec Drum, which was a little drum machine and stuff.
The printer.
Yeah, the Spectrum's built in. We've added that. I think Victor said everything that we tested it with works. So I'd like to say 100%, but you never know. There might be something there. But basically, most things, if not all, of the interfaces that you could plug into it should still work.
Well, I know one of the challenges with making like new classic hardware is often the branding. I mean, were there any issues getting the Spectrum branding, and who actually owns that today?
It's owned by B-Sky B, I think. Well, that's where
I believe that's true, yeah.
Yeah. And so Enrique just went to them and said, don't you mind if we use the branding? And he said, as long as you donate so much money to charity. So that was done.
To a charity. So a charity has benefited somewhere.
Yeah.
Which is good.
Has Clive Sinclair seen the project, and do you know what he thinks about it?
I don't know. I'm not sure. It'd be nice to get some feedback from him.
Well, Philip and Andrew, I mean, from your perspective, why do you think there was a need for new hardware instead of like emulation, for example?
There's a hell of a nostalgia for that era, and emulating just doesn't recapture the nostalgic angle. It's just, I've got a very powerful PC and look, I can kind of run an old game, but it's not the same. I mean, physically, it's not the same as the old ones. And although this is a new case and everything, it embodies the spirit of the original Spectrum hardware.
People want to sort of know that they've got the machine, and if they wanted, they could sort of load their old cassettes, play it the way they used to play it. Unfortunately, they now have some big new flat screen HDMI TV that the old Spectrum probably wouldn't actually work. But as Philip says, the idea of just picking up an emulator on a PC, it doesn't feel the same. I mean, I've done it many a time in many of these things, and I don't know, like trying to play, I don't know, supposing, I shouldn't say this, but it's like Nintendo 64. I played GoldenEye on a PC emulator, and it's just not the same as actually looking at it on a real Nintendo 64. And people go, but it's the same game. It's like, no, it feels different. And it feels different to sit at a Spectrum with a Spectrum sort of little keyboard and little machine plugged in your TV. And people want to recreate that. And that's what it does, and it does it really well. So it recreates and plays all the old games. And there's a sort of excitement and a hobby attitude of like there'll be new games coming out, and it should be fairly easy to actually have a go at making your own. You can't do that on modern consoles, and you can't just suddenly make a PlayStation 4 game. It's just not going to ever happen. And even trying to make something like a little iPhone game, it's different. It's an entirely different thing. There was a great hobby market around things like the Spectrum because they were actually quite easy to write a little bit of code. I was in a museum last week, and I was a little bit bored, and I just like line 10, print hello world, line 20, go to 10. Oh, look. And then within a few minutes, I was like random line generator, like flashing lines around the screen and going, I remember all this. It was just like, but I was creating stuff within a few minutes. You can't do that with anything else.
It's amazing how that simple command is kind of in mainstream culture as well. You know, a lot of people kind of talk about how they go on a Spectrum, still do that and reprint their name 1,000 times. You know, it's like built into the psyche. Yeah,
it's just so very simple.
Approachable.
You actually are programming, and it's doing it, and you realise that those games on the Spectrum and stuff, the people who actually wrote the games like ourselves pretty much had the same tools at their fingertips. There was no massive magic, massive budgets, massive teams or anything like that, or licensed in middleware and all this. They just had exactly the same. We just played around with it more and more and more.
Well, Jim, who would you say the Next is aimed at then? Is it like long-time fans, or is there a new audience interested in it too?
It's a bit of both, really, because there's a lot of like younger people that are quite interested as well. A lot of the original fans are going to be showing their kids it, and hopefully they'll pick things up and either play games or hopefully make games. So it's aimed at anyone who wants to use it, I suppose.
I have to say, with the next generation, I genuinely and truly believe that it will encourage some young hobbyists to get into it, and I really hope that they then take a similar path to all of us on the call and actually end up learning how to code and code really well, and then get great careers in the games industry. It is a good route in, and it's it would be lovely that if we can recreate that, which I think that is sort of an ambition of this project as well.
Well, I think Mike made a good point before about the fact that you turned the Spectrum on and you would dump straight into BASIC, weren't you? And you had to learn how to code really to use a machine, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, it was all the machines of that era were just kind of started up and were kind of ready to use. And you got the manual out and you had to figure your way around using commands, and that kind of got rid of the fear of the different things you had to type in. Whereas these days, if you can't click on it, then you're not quite sure what to do. So it's always a good thing to be forced to use the keyboard even a little bit. And I think as soon as you've done that, then putting in this 10 print 20 go to 10 thing isn't a big leap from that. And then once you've got that, you've done your first program and you think, hey, this is quite easy, and off you go, kind of thing.
One of the things is you have the power of the whole computer at your fingertips, and you don't need to understand all the complexity of modern computers. Modern computers have so much stuff in that it's bewildering, whereas actually you've got a lump of memory and you can type commands and you can sort of do anything on the processor. It's all a little bit slow and a little bit basic, but it's extremely approachable. Whereas nowadays you couldn't. It's like, I don't know. You got a multi-core processor, you got the CPU, you got your GPU, different
a million libraries.
Yeah, it's just like there's too many things, and the only way you're going to program is to use all these libraries and middleware and everything else. And then you feel that you're not really controlling the computer. You are getting it to do stuff, but on something like a Spectrum, it's raw. If it does it, it's because you did it, and it's kind of, you can completely understand it. Which is, I just think it's a sort of raw thing that is really nice to feel that.
These days, you just don't get to control a whole machine. You get to basically tell it what to do a little bit, but you can't take it over. You can't make it do, and stretch it and push it to the maximum. Very much there's always an operating system under there. There's always a bit of processor power being sucked away for something else. So it's great to be able to take over it and just, use all of it.
Jim, do you think it's great that it's kind of a British computer and, the latest generation, they've probably seen a lot of machines that aren't coming from the UK?
Yeah, it is. It's nice, made in Britain. Well, the bad weather keeps you in.
Well, I was thinking, how big was the Spectrum overseas? Because I know Ravi and I before were talking about these weird kind of Soviet clones that we saw like a few of, and there was a Timex in America. What was it? Did the Spectrum have much of a following outside of the UK?
In Russia, the Spectrum clones were massive. I believe there were 22 clones altogether. Wow. And somebody from the IT Museum in Ukraine got in touch with me and Andrew a couple of years ago, because you can on Facebook and stuff. And they were actually saying how massive the Spectrum was in Russia, and how they all loved Dizzy, which was very nice to hear. But
they did come years later.
It was very easy to duplicate all the cassettes themselves. We never saw any royalties, but that's fine. I don't care. They got all their clone machines, and then they were able to just kind of copy tapes, and that's what they did. And so there was a huge following of the Spectrum from Russia, and places like Poland. They love their video games, and again, they all started with the Spectrum as well. Or clones.
Yeah,
Spectrum clones.
That's right. I was going to say, these things all came later. So the sort of mid-'80s, it was very much a UK machine. And it went a little bit across Europe. I know it was quite popular in Spain and Italy. Yeah. I know that it was very popular there. But it didn't take off that strong. You got to remember, it's like you kind of got to understand English to sort of understand the manual and type in BASIC. So that does hold you back if English isn't your first language. But then a few years in, and people were starting to sort of create manuals and stuff in the other foreign languages, which suddenly got other people sort of at least using them. But they were always slightly difficult because fundamentally very much like English.
Well, the first time we saw the Next, I think it was, you showed us it, Jim, I think at Play Expo either Manchester or Blackpool a couple of years ago now. Yeah. And you hooked up this amazing demo where you're running like a movie from an SD card. What are like the most impressive things?
Manchester, wasn't it? Like?
Yeah, I think it was, yeah. What are the most impressive things either you've made the Next do or that you've seen other people do, Jim?
Well, Mike's done Lemmings. You can't get more impressive than that. that's an amazing feat in itself. The games that some people have been doing has been great. They look fantastic, and yet for me, I know some people, the extremists, are like, but it's not a specky. But for me, I think because the aspect ratio is still 256 by 192, but the resolution is still 256 by 192, it keeps the spirit of the Spectrum in it, and because it's programmed, well, the games have been programmed by like programmers from back in the day as well. It sort of keeps the feel of how the games flowed back in the day, so you get that playability in there as well, which is what the Spectrum was most known for as well.
Well, I know, Philip, you've got to leave to head off to an event in a moment, so we'll quickly talk about this before you have to go, because talking about big new titles for the Spectrum next, Dizzy recently celebrated his 30th birthday, and you're actually making a new Dizzy game for the Spectrum next. I know we did get a look at a Play Expo in Blackpool. Tell us about Wonderful Dizzy.
So, as that a nice happy coincidence happened of the guys Dmitry and Eugenie in Russia with their Crystal Kingdom Dizzy, and then the opportunity of the Spectrum Next, we said, well, this is the time to sort of make a new Dizzy game if we're going to. But it was then, well, okay, if we are going to, we've got to design it. But where do you start? What's the design? So we were just having a chat during the day, just at work, saying, well, the theme that we really loved was kind of looking back at classic old fairy tales and sort of saying, oh, can we kind of use any ideas and do a mashup of all of those? And it was almost by coincidence. I went home that night and I just couldn't sleep. And I was just kind of going through in my head, well, what classic stories are there that are out there that would kind of fit really well? And they were just going through my head. And suddenly I hit on Wizard of Oz, and it just suddenly all dropped into place, that you have all of those interesting characters, and obviously in Wizard of Oz it's Dorothy going out there to solve all their problems and then try and get home, and in our case it would be Dizzy solving all the same problems and trying to get home. And we've also had this spirit in Dizzy of the Yoke folk taking on kind of different characters and different personalities, which is exactly the fundamental principle of the Wizard of Oz story, that actually they're all characters that Dorothy knew from her farmland and from back home in Kansas, but they were recast as really interesting characters who had issues and problems and needed help. It's just like it's Dizzy. It's like, oh my God, it's Dizzy. It's so easy to go and cast sort of the characters sort of as Dozy as a scarecrow, Denzel as the Tin Man, and the lion, and then you've got the witches, and we've got Daisy and Dora as the witches, and then we had Zax. Now, obviously, you've got the Wicked Witch of the East who gets squashed in the first scene of the book and the film. So we don't have to worry about who she was, because, of course, we don't have a character for her, but that's all right. She died in the first scene, so that's cool. But we needed a Witch of the West, but we've always had a wizard. So we just said, well, it's fine, we'll have a Witch of the West, and it will look a little bit like Zax, sort of recast. And then you can kind of also play on lots of jokes, because one of the things that we're trying to do with this game is kind of capture the nostalgia of the 80s and the technology. So there's actually quite a few jokes in there about the 80s and about the technology and about the Spectrum and stuff. I don't want to ruin it all and give away some of the gags, but looking back on it, you can make in jokes and laugh about some of the stuff we had back in the 80s. It's a wonderful creative experience to be able to sort of go back and sort of do a new Dizzy design after so long.
And Philip's been designing a lot of the maps and the puzzles exactly the way we used to do it. He's sort of like hand drawing it all and stuff. The only difference is that sort of when he gives it to me, I'm sort of like scanning them, putting them in a computer and using Excel and Google Docs as a sort of combined document to sort of fill in all the gaps and make sure that all the story and things flow. But I mean, people like familiarity, but then they don't like what they've sort of had before. And we found this idea. It's a little panto as well. It's like when you go to pantomime, which is a very British thing, and the Carry On series used to do this, is you take a very familiar concept that everybody knows, and then you tell stories around the familiar things. The people who have done it best in recent years was obviously Shrek. So people say sort of like, that seems pretty popular. Everybody knows the characters. Everyone knows the the situations, but they don't know this particular way in which it's told, and it's told very, very tongue-in-cheek, which is actually what you want to do. So anyway, it's going really well, the design.
And the programming is making good progress as well. Eugenie is doing a great job, and
Dimitri,
we've got Gerard doing all the sprites, Gerard Bentley doing all the sprites. It's all coming together really well.
When's the game going to be out then?
I don't like to. We don't like to put time pressure on people. Partly because
everyone's doing it as a hobby.
Yeah, everybody's doing it as a hobby, and kind of no money's changing hands or whatever. But also, if they go too fast, they might get ahead of me on the script, because I've still got some script lines to do, which I haven't done yet. But I reckon 2 or 3 months, and they'll be pretty much done. I would guess.
And is that an exclusive to the next?
Well, initially the plan was to sort of we will do this if the next is successful. The next was successful, so that kind of committed us, and that was a little bit of a, oh God, what have we signed up for now? What have we committed ourselves to? We are going to make sure that there are lots of next features in there, but also there is a sort of a part of us that wants to see what could we have got out of the original Spectrum. So there's going to be a mode that works. So it's going to be a mode in there which is classic Spectrum mode, and then there's going to be enhanced next versions. As for exclusive, it'll be interesting to see, because you see, the thing is, everybody's always asked us, would you sort of design a new Dizzy game? Would you bring it back? And recently people said, well, would you do a Switch version? Would you do this version? So I don't want to ever say that we won't. At this point in time, no plans, but I don't want to say never. Because actually, I have to say, how cool would it be to have wonderful Dizzy on the Switch or something with the amazing graphics that that's capable of? Okay. So I don't want to say never. At this point in time, there are no plans.
Well, Philip, I know you have to get off to this event. Thank you so much for joining us. And we can't wait to see wonderful Dizzy. You're to hang around for a bit, Andrew?
I guess I can for a little while.
Excellent.
Yes.
We've got a few more minutes. Well, thank you very much, Philip. See you later. Bye-bye. Well, we did mention in there as well about your Lemmings demo, Mike. So tell us a bit about this. You managed to get how many Lemmings on screen?
Well, the original goal when I started was to see if it was possible to get the full 100 on, because that was always the big thing with the Amiga. We kind of tried to push it, and that was about as much as we could get on the Amiga. So with the extra speed, initially it was going to go up to 28 megahertz. So with the extra speed, I thought, well, you might just be able to cope with it. It's since dropped down to 14, but I've still managed to get the full 100 with the objects and level all being kind of drawn. So technically, that's the complicated bit, getting that drawing and running at the right speed. So that was an interesting challenge. You never would have managed it on a normal machine. It's using about 128K of raw code, which, obviously that just would have filled the machine before, never mind the graphics. So it's been interesting, yes.
Well, you did that, the C-Spect emulator. I mean, is that helping people with development?
Well, I originally did that because when I first started getting interested in it, obviously Jim had one of the early boards. There was a couple of folk that were kind of posting things, and Victor, who was writing all the hardware parts, was kind of posting updates, and I was getting awful jealous of all these guys being able to write. I think Jim was doing his Baggers on Ladders game, and I was wanting to have a play as well. So I already had a Spectrum emulator that I wrote in the late 90s that I actually ported to Dreamcast and PS2 and stuff. So because there wasn't that much hardware extra on the Next at that point, I thought I could put some sprites in it, I could have a little play. I was very much focused on making a dev tool rather than a full-blown emulator. So basically just like a 40K machine with the extra hardware in it so I could play. And then when I started to do bits with it, Jim was at the point where you were having to carry your machine back and forward to work for lunch.
Yeah.
So he's going, can I get that? That would save me a little bit.
Yeah. Can I just add it that C-Spect has been a lifesaver. It has been so helpful throughout development. Still use it now. Quite a few people use it. Like I said, it's just sped things up so much and saves me carrying the Next around.
So that was basically to do that, is to try and get the fast dev turnaround. So it's grown over time as the hardware's come in. As Victor's been adding stuff, then I've been putting it into C-Spec to be able to test it. So he has demos to then test on the hardware as well. So I think the layer 2 and the low res stuff, we did some demos using C-Spec, gave him some snapshots over that he could then run and make sure the actual hardware worked. So it's been quite nice for that as well.
How important was Jonathan Cordwell as arcade game designer? Has that kind of helped speed up development as well?
Yeah, there's a lot of people using AGD for the Spectrum, with the original Spectrum, and hopefully when he's converted it for the next, and when the next is out, people will take that on, and there's a shed load of demos that the guys on the AGD forums have been making. So as soon as you get it, you'll be able to have lots of stuff to test out and play and learn, and hopefully make a load of games.
One thing I wondered is, can any of the classic Spectrum software see any improvements by using Next hardware?
If you've still got the source and you can change them, then yeah. But otherwise, you'd have to hack into them and change things to change routines to make it draw sprites with the hardware or whatever. So
yeah, I mean, you could, like say, just get the assembly, the snapshot, poke into it wherever there's a call to draw a sprite, change that to use a hardware sprite if you want. But that's a fairly large undertaking. It sounds quite easy, but
it is, isn't
that'd be quite complicated.
It's not as easy as just doing it.
Yeah.
Well, Andrew, how do you find kind of developing for the Next compared to the original machine? What's the easier process, is it?
I mean, we're just designing the game on paper and working with these other guys, and they're using emulators at this point. I think hardware is just being sent to them. So we're not doing it ourselves. But the problem is that our tools that we were using to write all those original Dizzy games on the Spectrum were all via the Amstrad. We had a CPC 6128, the disk drive one, with a Maxam ROM chip in the back for the compiler, and then we'd strung that to the back of a Spectrum with a piece of electronics that a friend made, which was sort of breadboard with solder wires and all sorts of stuff. We do have all the stuff, but to try to sort of get that development environment up and running again would just be really hard. So it's not something that we could recreate what we used to have easily, and we're not actually coding it this time around. So, can't really answer that.
You haven't got to use the serial cable in your Amstrad anymore, though?
No, we do have all this stuff. I mean, we're like Dizzy. We collect everything. It's currently in a museum, actually. All of our stuff is in Trowbridge Museum, which is actually where we grew up. It's near Bath, and they said, could they do a little exhibition of all of our games and stuff? And it's like, and Philip said, yeah. Well, actually, it's Philip's wife said, yeah, you can empty the flipping loft. Because it was at the National Video Game Arcade in Nottingham, quite a lot of stuff, but actually more stuff is at this other museum. And we're going to end up with this sort of travelling games museum. It's got like all the old computers, and it's quite fun. As that's the museum I was at when I was just like idle with an Amstrad and Spectrum, just typing things. It's fun what you do.
Well, here's a question it would be quite nice to get all of your answers to. We'll start with you, Mike, actually. What would you like to see people doing on the Spectrum next?
I think more of the kind of classic looking games, but using the sprites to kind of help accentuate them a little bit. So still your kind of platformers and shooters, because it's still the kind of old school gameplay. But then at the moment, most folk are concentrating on doing 256 colour stuff and whatnot. I mean, even I'm doing that. But I would quite like to do and see more games that look visually like the original, but then sprites to get rid of things like colour clash and stuff, and then using like the layer 2 to do some effects or whatnot. So basically just push the machine in a slightly different direction instead of going towards what it looks like just now, which is just, we can kind of beat Amiga stuff. I mean, I'm guilty of that as well. A lot of the stuff I've been doing is just, the Amiga did this, I could do this too. But I think if I was starting an actual dedicated game, I would probably try and do something that's more like the original high-res, blocky colours, then use the sprites to kind of give just a more enhanced feel to things. So it felt like a Spectrum plus a little bit, I think, because I really liked the look of the original games. And being able to get rid of colour clash and use the layer 2 to do scrolling and stuff would be nice. But you can still use layer 2 and have it look like the Spectrum. So I think I would quite like to see more of that.
What would you like to see, Jim?
Yeah, I'd like to see people making games and demos, and again, like Mike, wanting to use the original Specky palette into the original 15 colours, because the black was the same black on it. Using the original 15 colours, but having each pixel a different colour. No, having the ability to have each pixel a different colour. So you remove the colour clash, but you still have the look of the original.
What about you, Andrew? Anything you'd like to see on the next?
Well, it's really interesting. I mean, one of the things that as we've jumped from generation to generation, there's games that come out on a generation and you sort of look at it and think, well, hang on, this game could have existed sort of like years ago, and like how sort of interesting would it have been had you sort of worked it out before? I'm trying to think of some good examples. I mean, people will sort of, I don't know, they might write Angry Birds or something like on the Spectrum next, and you go, yeah, actually, that game could have probably been created pretty nicely on a Spectrum. And I think things like that are sort of wacky, and I think people will end up doing that, but then that's not original. That's just to say, look what I've managed to achieve. I've achieved a relatively modern game, but on something, and it could have been, that game could have come out in the 80s. I think that's kind of an interesting thing. But one of the things that I'd like to see is people just going back and being creative, but not being scared by the fact that they have to have sort of art production skills in order to make a game that is worthy and respected for its creativity, because everyone knows, look, there's a certain limitation here. It's like when anyone can write a book, but then it takes just a better imagination to write something like a Harry Potter as opposed to someone's school essay. It just takes time and effort, but it's your imagination. Whereas I do know that, like, you thinking, well, if I was to do it on something else, I'd need to be really good at art, and obviously we weren't very good at art. But the Spectrum was about the level we could draw. So I'd like to see people take certain games. I mean, something like a Minecraft, in some ways, you can see that feels like a sort of slightly dated product. I mean, but somebody comes up with an idea that just works really well for that hardware, and you're thinking that's absolutely incredible. And they haven't been scared and put off by other things.
Well, Jim, I know developers have had the boards for a while now, and Kickstarter backers have started to receive them as well. When can we actually go on the website and just buy one then?
I don't know yet. It depends on how we can, well, Enrique can organise something with resellers, because the way it works is we need to do it in bulk to get the order, well, to get the bits cheap enough to be able to get it down to that price to then sell on to the people. So, like, you'd have to get a reseller to buy about 200 or so at a time to get to a point where it's cheap enough for the parts to make out to get it out at a reasonable price.
I know, obviously, judging by all the hype that's been online, I mean, it's I know what a massive interest there is in this project, and you've definitely sold at least 2 Spectrum Next in the studio tonight. Yeah,
cool. Yeah, we know that there is interest because there's lots of people that want them, and they held back on the Kickstarter, and then it was too late after once it finished. There's a few resellers that are interested. It's just whether we can organise, whether Enrique can organise how to do it that makes it good for the purchaser.
Well, I think having too much demand is not a bad thing at all, is it?
Yeah, that's true. Well, the thing is, the more we sell, the more people have them, which means the developers who are making games for it will, if they want to get paid for it, they'll be able to get paid for it and then continue making games for it, because there'll be more units out there for them to sell. So it would be nice if we could restart the industry again.
What I'd like to see is some sort of like school clubs and hobby clubs, sort of based around this, and even like game jams. Like it would be that'd be a really nice thing to sort of be able to do, a sort of Spectrum Next game jam. People would be happy to sort of travel to that and spend a weekend all working together and getting something out, and it will feel like a proper full game that they've done.
Funny you mentioned the game jam thing, because Andy Spencer over at the Awesome Arcade Club, best place in the world ever, absolutely love that place. He's ordered from the Kickstarter, I think it was 3 or 4, I think it was 3, and he's going to have them at the arcade club and organise like get-togethers, like programming evenings for people to come in and make games and stuff. So
that's
like
in Manchester, isn't it?
Bury, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, I think the more people that get their hands on the Spectrum Next, the more exciting things we're going to see. We think it's such an interesting project, and it's been amazing having you guys on as well, and the fact that you guys are involved as well. So, Jim, Andrew, Mike, thank you so much for coming on, and we can't wait to see what you do.
Cool.
Thank you.